Yeah, I can't see what.
Hello, hello, Clyde Cleveland. This is
Hi,
Kathleen Dudley from New Mexico. How are you doing in Florida?
I'm doing great.
Great. This is an ongoing series of educational information on the forming of the, um, well, what do I say? The development of the United States throughout history. And Clyde's going to be talking about associations. And Clyde, I wondered, welcome, and I wondered if you could give a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, so I got into this the study of our founders many years ago, and I started out by starting a constitutional study class in the 1990s in my house in Fairfield, Iowa, and that led to all kinds of things. One of the things that led to is I became the Iowa State coordinator for getting rid of the income tax. It was Citizens for Alternative Tax System and replacing it with a national retail sales tax. Traveled around the country speaking about that. That led to me meeting Ed Griffin, author of Creature from Jekyll Island. It led to me joining the Libertarian Party. I ran for governor. I wrote 2 books, Common Sense Revisited, Restoring the Heart of America. I call myself a political historian. I love reading everything I can about the period of the revolution, during the revolution, before the revolution, and right after it. And I'm a very passionate fan of our founding principles. I think that our founding principles that were set down in the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Declaration of Independence were life-changing for the entire planet. And we're still in an evolutionary process at this point in time, because we go through it. We have this great 150, 200 years of America with, being free and creating prosperity, and millions, hundreds of millions of people moving here from all over the world because of freedom. We showed the world the importance of freedom. Our founders were amazing. But, there's always different pulls and pushes. There's always the centralizing forces and the decentralizing forces. We've gone backward in many ways over the last 150 years. And now I think it is a time, it's a very interesting time that we're in right now, an opportunity, I believe, because people are seeing what happens when the forces of centralization and tyranny start to take over, and they start to exercise their power, which they're all addicted to. This power is an addictive drug. Our founders knew this. And right now, it's so in your face. The tyranny is so in our face that people are waking up by the millions in this country and around the world to what can happen when we lose our freedom and people start to take it away from us. So anyway, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about today is the way we create associations and groups that allow us to restore our freedom and to act freely and to take care of things without government force. Really what it comes down to is that we have the indigenous power within us to use our creativity, our full potential, the gift of free will that was given to us by our Creator to create whatever we want to do. And sometimes what we want to do is we want to expand our reach as human beings. And so we create what I call surrogates. We create corporations or limited partnerships. I used to create limited partnerships to buy real estate and use those as funding vehicles. That's a surrogate. Those limited partnerships are nothing but a surrogate. And we control our surrogates, whether it's a partnership or a corporation or a government, by founding documents. We create documents that tells the people who are running the surrogate exactly what they can do. It's a charter, it's a constitution in the case of a government, it's bylaws in the case of a corporation. Those are the things that control the corporation or control the surrogate. And and everything is fine as long as the people who are running the surrogate pay attention to the rules and are made to pay attention to the rules. If they don't, if the people running the surrogate, whether it be a corporation or a partnership or a government, if they start to think that they have indigenous power, that's when the trouble starts. And that's what happens, because power is a drug. It'll keep happening. So what we have to do right now at this point in time is our surrogate, our government, at all levels really, but especially the federal government and the world government, do not have indigenous power. They're our servant. We're the master. That's what the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by George Mason, lay out so clearly. So that's where we are. And now we're going to talk about associations, which are so important, and how to form groups. So that's what the topic of today is. And
before you go into that, could you just talk just briefly, how did we get ourselves in that place? I mean,
it's natural because what happens is people are complacent. We created this incredible machinery for prosperity in this country. And actually, is this the one? Hold on just a second. I have a quote down here from Jefferson about how, basically I'll paraphrase, what he says is, people will become complacent. From this point forward, we will be going downhill. And people they will be concerned only with making money and, the creature comforts, material things, and they won't pay attention. And because they won't pay attention, we will eventually lose more and more of our freedom, until at some point in the future, our freedoms will revive or expire in a convulsion. I believe that he was seeing ahead 240 years and where we are at right now. I really do. So, he was that prescient. And I really believe that that's where we are right now. It's a great opportunity, but we really need to focus, and we need to focus on those principles of indigenous power that we are given by our Creator, and we need to reform our institutions. We need to reform them, and I mean restructure them so that they are following our dictates. We're not following their dictates. Okay?
all right.
So should I start?
Please do.
Okay. I want to start with de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Maybe some of you are familiar with that, maybe not. De Tocqueville came here. He was actually General Lafayette's nephew, I believe. Either nephew or grandson, I'm not sure on that. But he came here in the 1930s. He was a political historian. He was a philosopher. He understood human behavior and human psychology at a very, very deep level. He was a genius. Amazing. When you read Democracy in America, you're blown away by the intelligence of this guy. But he was fascinated by what was happening in America, the American experience, and how it was changing the whole world at that time in the 1830s. So he came here to study America and Americans. And he stayed for 12 years, and he wrote this amazing book. But he believed, from everything that he saw and being here for 12 years, that the key to American success and liberty was non-coercive associations. So I'm just going to read you some quotes that are from his book about associations in America. I find this fascinating.
Your camera.
Okay. Oh, my camera, sorry. Okay. Americans of all ages, all conditions, and all dispositions constantly form associations. They have not only commercial and manufacturing companies, in which all take part, but associations of 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, serious, feudal, extensive or restricted, enormous or diminutive. The Americans make associations to give entertainments, to found establishments for education, to build inns, to construct churches, to diffuse books, to send missionaries to faraway lands, and in this manner they found hospitals, prisons, and schools. As soon as several of the inhabitants of the United States have taken up an opinion or a feeling which they wish to promote in the world, they look out for mutual assistance. And as soon as they have found each other out, they combine. From that moment, they are no longer isolated men, but a power seen from afar, whose actions serve for an example, and whose language is listened to. Pretty amazing stuff, eh? And, you know, it just shows the scope of what associations do and have done in America and how they use them. Okay, next quote. I have often admired the extreme skill with which the inhabitants of the United States succeed in proposing a common object to the exertions of a great many men, and in getting them voluntarily to pursue it. I have since traveled over England, whence the Americans have taken some of their laws and many of their customs, and it seemed to me that the principle of association was by no means so constantly or so adroitly used in that country. So this thing he thought was a unique American trait, and that word voluntarily can't be overestimated or underestimated. It was overestimated. It was the voluntary nature, non-coercive associations. People would gather together, and they knew they had the skill of how to create a group and make that group be successful. That is a skill which I believe we have gradually over the last 100 years or so lost in this country to a great degree, because we have allowed government to start doing things for us and lost a lot of our skill of creating these non-coercive, what I call non-coercive enabling organizations, which is a good, yeah, go ahead.
You know, it's really no different than back in the settlement of Canada. Farley Mowat wrote about the white men coming into the Northwest Territories and trading guns and ammunition for the furs. And then once they depleted that area, they left. And of course, over that 50, few generations of time, 50 years or so, the people had lost their capacity to hunt with bow and arrow, and they no longer had bullets. And all of a sudden they found themselves absolutely without the skills to be able to survive. And in a lot of ways, the same thing has happened to us. This country began with the entrepreneurial spirit, with people coming here, understanding their skills, learning their skills, and working with one another.
Very perceptive. That's very, very good. Very good example.
Cooperation with one another. And then we gave our own power up and outside of ourselves. And that became that became the noose around our necks.
Yes. It's there though. It's in our DNA. We just need to get that skill back. And that's what we're going to talk about here tonight, is how to do some of that, and how to actually create associations, and what are the fundamental principles that you want to have in an association to be successful. So let's go on to the next.
We're there.
Oh, we're already there?
No,
I think we have, aren't we?
Yes, there we are.
Yeah,
sorry.
okay. All right. So nothing is, in my opinion, this is Tocqueville, is more deserving of our attention than the intellectual and moral associations of America. In democratic countries, the science of association is the mother of science. The progress of all the rest depends upon the progress it has made. That's pretty clear. He's saying, in order to continue to be free in a democracy or a republic, the mother the science of association is the mother of all sciences. Amongst the laws which rule human societies, there is one which seems to be more precise and clear than all others. If men are to remain civilized or to become so, the art of associating together must grow and improve. Okay, let's move on.
I was talking to Rick Martin today, and he said, let us not make the mistake of referring to this great country as a democracy. We must remember and refer to it as a republic, because a democracy, underlying a democracy, is a centralization of power and a giving up of the individual empowerment and giving it over to the centralized group.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I have heard, and I have not been able to validate this, and I would, if anybody out there listening could help me with this, but I've heard that Tocqueville actually named his book originally Republic in America, not Democracy in America.
Oh, very interesting.
And that name was changed, which makes sense, because he's not describing a democracy, he's describing a republic.
Yeah, yeah,
so
exactly.
I have a feeling that that switch was made at some point. I don't know when, but I'm gonna keep researching that and see if there's any validation of that story. All right, so let's talk about some examples of organizations that have figured out how to use associations to be successful. Because the art of association, as he said, can be commercial in nature, it can be private, it can be to build a church, it can be to found a religious group, it could be made to do anything. But this is a story of Visa. And Visa was originally called Bank of America, and it was the credit card company. At that point in time, in the 1970s, the credit card was just becoming a huge thing. And MasterCard and American Express were way, way ahead of Bank of America. So the Bank of America people got together and they said, we got to do something because we're losing ground fast. And they said, well, we got to bring the right person in. And one of them said, let's talk to this D. Hock guy. He's done amazing things. And so they interviewed him, and D. Hock said, yeah, I'll do this. I'll take this on one condition, is that you do not interfere with how I'm going to run this company, because it's not going to look like any other company you've ever seen. And they agreed. That was in 1968. Okay, so I was wrong. Not 70s, it was 68. With nothing but a list of principles which he'd gleaned from a lifetime of observing nature, within just a few years, it was 7 or 8 years, Hock's company was the largest commercial enterprise on the planet with 1.25 trillion in annual revenues. I'm pretty sure he was the first company to reach over $1 trillion a year in annual revenues.
Wow.
Amazing. It's just 7 or 8 years. The amazing thing about Visa was that nobody could find the center of the company. One observer called it a non-coercive enabling organization that existed only for the purpose of assisting owner members to fulfill their activities with greater capacity, more effectively, and less cost. And this is what Hock called a chaord. He wrote a book called The Birth of the Chaotic Age. He saw this as changing the world, what he had done there, and the principles that he had gleaned from watching nature, actually, natural law. So let's go on to the next slide.
And also, chaos. Chaotic. So chaos and order
Right.
have feminine and masculine principles.
Yes. So chaos is the feminine. No, pheno.
Yes.
Feminine, and then order is the masculine.
Right.
So the perfect blend of chaos and order, in terms of Hock's thinking, was maximum amount of freedom with just enough order to make sure that the organization was stable to continue, that it would continue to exist. But he wanted maximum amount of freedom in the organization, because he understood that maximum amount of freedom would bring out the maximum amount of each individual's potential and their creativity and individual ability to use their full potential. So these are some of the points that he said were the keys to creating a chaotic organization. It must not attempt to impose uniformity. So the center doesn't try to impose anything except a way of a direction or a goal. Remember that when I talk about the association, which was our first constitution, must not attempt to impose uniformity. It should be open to all qualified participants. Next point, power, function, and resources should be distributed to the maximum degree. Let me just talk about what this means. Instead of the center of the organization telling people what to do or having all the resources and the power, you want to push all of that to the furthest limits of the organizational structure. And what Jefferson talked a lot about is this, exactly the same thing, is that the communities that people live in should have the power, function, and resources to rule their own lives. And the amount of power is less as it gets away from the town. In other words, the county would have less power than the people in the town. And the state would have less power than the counties, and the federal government would have even less power. It would be, the federal government should be a non-coercive enabling organization. That's it. It shouldn't be telling people what to do or how to live their lives or have any control over what they put in their body or anything on that level. So no interest should be able to dominate deliberations or control decisions, particularly management. To the maximum degree possible, everything should be voluntary. And the center should introduce, not compel change. And the organization should be infinitely malleable, yet extremely durable. That's where the order came in. Now, this is what D. Hock said about what he felt after he had done this with Visa, and after he had taught this to other people and seen what they had done in other companies, in other organizations. He knew that these principles could be used in any organizational structure, corporate, nonprofit, religious organizations, and governments. He knew that. So what he said was, at this point in time, a shifting of culture, science, society, and institutions enormously greater than the world has ever experienced. Ahead, the possibility of regeneration and individuality, liberty, community, and ethics, such as the world has never known, and a harmony with nature, with one another, and with a divine intelligence, such as the world has always dreamed. D. Hock. Pretty powerful vision this man had. And he knew how to do it. And our founders knew how to do it. Particularly guys like Mason and Jefferson. They understood all of this. So there are other people, just a couple other examples I use a lot. I'm not going to talk about much about them at all tonight because I think you get the message. Gore and Associates and Semco in Brazil have both followed a lot of the same principles at Visa and have done extremely well. And I have videos on those two companies that I can tell you about later. But the fundamental similarities of all three companies were a belief in freedom and non-coercion, highly developed values based on ethical principles, belief that individuals will blossom, thrive, and flourish with a focus on non-coercion and consensus building. And also some other principles that were in evidence in all three: unanimity in decision-making, small groups, unanimous decision-making, so that a minority does not feel cut off or weakened by the majority. So whenever possible, decisions should be unanimous, and things should be broken down into small groups working together with other small groups. And then gender balance is also something that was evident in these companies, where a much higher degree of women involved than in a typical company. And also they were non-hierarchical. They flattened, did everything they could not to have hierarchy. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute with Bill Gore, because I met him. Small self-governing units with a highly effective but flexible communication and feedback system, and resulted in developing highly creative, happy, innovative, successful individuals working in harmony with each other. So let's go on. Bill Gore, I had the opportunity to invite Susan Gore, Bill Gore's daughter, to be a director on my board of directors in my company. And so I got to learn a lot about Gore from her. And also I got to meet her parents, Bill and his wife. And when he handed me his card, it said Bill Gore, associate, not CEO, not founder, not richest guy in the world, which he was one of at that point in time. And so but he was totally humble, and he made sure that no one in the company felt like they were better than anyone else from the very beginning. The day a new associate walked in, he had the same title as Bill Gore. So he wanted people to know that they have the authority to make decisions and are responsible for the outcomes the day they walk in. And when he would take people from other companies that had been in hierarchies and he put them in their environment and stripped away their positional power that they were used to, he said it could bring them to their knees because they hadn't realized how much of their success was a function of their position and power and their ability to command and control. So the Gore model changes the traditional role of the leader. The leader's job is to make sure the culture is healthy, it's working as a system, the teams are coming together, they're getting diverse points of view, best ideas rising to the surface. Leaders are comfortable with not being the center of all the action, with not trying to drive every decision. At Gore, leaders are not chosen by higher ups. They're chosen from the people in the groups because they're effective leaders. They're effective at getting the most out of the people in the group. And the people know that, so they elect their own leaders. Totally different than any hierarchical organization. Okay.
Well, and if you look at what's happening today with the hierarchical control, those that are totally drunken on power,
right,
are the very leaders that embody a real psychopathic characteristic set. And I heard someone say, a German historian recently say, you put a psychopath on an island alone, and it will take just a matter of a few weeks before they become completely undone.
Right.
So, very similar to what was happening, as you say, in Gore's situation, where they took hierarchical leaders and put them in. They couldn't function.
No, not, and within a few weeks they'd either be gone or they'd figure it out. Yeah. And that's how, when people come into Gore, they have an opportunity to go around to the different groups, and the groups are 8 to 10 people, and they operate on unanimity, and they decide who's going to get paid what, each other's salary within the group. It's like a conglomeration of groups of 8 or 10 people that are their own company, working with the other companies and being able to share, abilities and resources within those groups to get things done. Everything is voluntary. It's really amazing. But some people can't make it in that environment. They need to be told what to do. They're not comfortable with having to think for themselves. They're not comfortable with having to perform as an individual within that environment. So within a few months, it becomes clear whether or not they're going to be able to make it or not. And they are either there and they're successful and thriving, or they're not. But anyway, it's just basically a way to get the most out of people by having these non-coercive groups that are operating in this way.
Well, and I believe that it's our nature to, when we are empowered,
Right,
that we move into that very creative force that's an internal connection. And that is what motivates us to be our very best and bring our best to the world. And we have been so coerced, we've been so programmed. The Jesuits said, "Give me your boy until he is 7, and I will show you the man." And we know from psychological tests and various folks that we those first 7 years we're just sponges.
right,
And so unless we awaken and unless we become empowered, we live through the lens and through the psyche and the subconscious of a 7-year-old our entire life. And
right.
those are the very people that can't be a part of a system that embraces our individuality.
Yes, right, right. Our founders knew all this, and they really understood. They were really bright people. They understood that, human beings function better when they're free. They understood that they use their full potential rather than being told what to do. It makes sense.
Well, isn't it what you said earlier too, that the people who came to this country left the religious and the political and the economic persecution?
Exactly.
And they came because they were under this tremendous squeeze. And even the Reformation, the separation and the breakdown of the Roman Catholic Church, I mean, all of that gave fodder for, created all of this incentive for people
Yeah.
to seek this world.
They knew very well what happens when power becomes corrupt, and they knew when institutions become corrupt and become more and more tyrannical. And so that's where they came to America, and that's why people still come to this day, because they want freedom. And people come from a communist country or a country where the government is telling everybody exactly what they have to do, and very little freedom, and they come here and it's just so wonderful. It's like they can be awakened again and they can use their full potential. And we can't let that go. We can't let this country devolve into a tyranny. And that's where they want to take us. I mean, people in government right now, as you said, they're drunk on power right now. It's like heroin, and they just want more. And that's what happens when people start to, and I believe that the same kind of things happen in the brain, in the substances that are created in the brain, and the endorphins and things like that. I believe that heroin and power probably are very, very similar, create very, very similar changes in the brain. And Jefferson totally understood this. All of them did. And that's why they tried to really make it a very bottom-up society where indigenous power controlled the surrogates. Individuals controlled these institutions, corporations. Let's talk about that for just a second. Corporations at the beginning, the states chartered the corporations, and they had 5 years maybe of operation before they had to be reviewed, or 10 years. There was no such thing as lifetime or infinite life corporations. If they weren't being good citizens as a corporation, if they weren't operating in tune with the environment and in tune with what the people wanted, they wouldn't have their charter renewed. They'd be done. They'd be out of business. The idea that there's a corporate shield to shield people who make a decision that destroys other people's lives or the environment or the air or the water, and they can get away with it without having to be personally responsible, is so far removed from our founding principles. And that's what they have. Somehow these extraordinarily wealthy corporate rulers in the 1800s were able to buy Supreme Court judges and make those changes so that corporations would have eternal life and as much or more power than an individual human being. Imagine that. They've taken a surrogate and made it more powerful than a human being.
Well, it's the beginning of the robotic life, and we know that corporations have no soul, and
Right.
they cannot be sued. And
Right.
you look also at the 14th Amendment, the time of personhood for the Black people, and that was when corporations were given personhood, right at a time of creating this total dignity for people who had been enslaved, and corporations managed to wiggle themselves in, and of all things, of all the abominable things, be given personhood under the,
Well, you get into a whole thing with the 14th Amendment. They actually didn't free the slaves. They made them federal citizens instead of being state citizens, which
right,
is,
but they got personhood.
yeah, yeah. But it's, it was not a good situation. And that's another thing that needs to be fixed at some point. But anyway, let's wrap up with this quote, one of my favorite quotes from Bucky Fuller, which is when he's talking about changing something that's become an institution. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Well, we've allowed our model to be top down, to be government, to be force-based. And we need to change that. We need to go back to from what Tocqueville saw here, which was associations, non-coercive enabling organizations that did everything in our country. With government was very, very limited and very small. People hardly talked about government. This is one of the things that Tocqueville said, and then I'll finish. Tocqueville said that everywhere he went, government was not talked about. Government was not obvious. Government was not observed. It wasn't around. It was like it didn't exist. But what did exist was these associations. And he said everybody he met was a member of at least 6 or 7 or 8 associations. Everything was done in these non-coercive enabling organizations. That is the model that we need to recreate to fulfill what Bucky Fuller is talking about. We need to get out of this model that we've got now, which is top down, and go to the bottom up model. And one of my favorite quotes we'll end with is that back to the laws of our being, laws of nature. This is all laws of nature. The principles on which we engaged, of which the charter of our independence is a record, were sanctioned by the laws of our being, and we but obeyed them in pursuing undeviatingly the course they called for. Jefferson said that in 1809, the year after he was in his 8 years of presidency. So pretty amazing. Is that the last slide?
Yes.
Yep. So to sum up, I think that we need to get active. Every American needs to get active. You need to join organizations that are doing things to recreate that model that we started this country with, non-coercive, enabling organizations where you can use your full potential. And there are so many different freedom groups out there. I've been working with one called Friends of Liberty United, and the website is friendsoflibertyunited.com. And what we're doing with that group is we're organizing different groups around the country that have the same goal of freedom and liberty. And there's so many of them out there. We're trying to unite them and get people, one, who want to help and be involved in one of those groups, to join FOLU, what we call, Friends of Liberty United, FOLU. Join, and then we will match you up with groups that are also members of FOLU, because groups join as well, and put you in touch with somebody or somebody from that group that you would be interested in working with. Right now, we're working with, we're bringing people in to work with the law group, the constitutional law group, and with Rick Martin. And Rick Martin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And they're doing phenomenal work around the country right now, going after these governors and mayors and county bureaucrats that are totally operating outside of the Constitution, telling people what they have to do, when they can come into work, whether they can open their business or not. They do not have the right, bottom line, folks, they do not have the right to do any of these things. There's been no legislation passed by the Congress in these states to shut down people's businesses. They're just making these things up and acting as if they have the power to do these things, and they do not. And a good constitutional lawyer will sue them and put them in jail, and you'll be able, the people who have lost money in their businesses will be able to collect. And that's what's going on all over the nation right now. And I was on a call last night, and Kathleen will be on the next call. We're going to have these calls every week, and people from all over the country were telling their stories and their successes of how they're keeping from getting arrested, keeping fines from being paid that have been charged on them, and winning, because it's unconstitutional, everything that they're doing. Telling people they have to wear face masks. They have no right to force us to do that. They have no right to tell us that we have to stand 6 feet or 10 feet away from people. They don't have any right to shut down somebody's business. They don't have any right to tell somebody they can't come and work and go to their job. None of that. But yet they're doing it. They're drunk on power.
And what you said at the very beginning was it was the complacency that brought about this erosion of our freedoms initially. Mm-hmm. And I want to, just encourage people to, if you can't find a group, create a group. That's the entrepreneurial spirit. That's the spirit that de Tocqueville saw, recognized, and was in awe about America. So we all have it within us, in our DNA, our capacity to, to recognize others as well. We have a group in Santa Fe, and we are all becoming empowered by what the actual mandates, edicts by the governor and the local mayors are all about, and realizing that because they have no power, it's just a matter of standing up to these bullies who
Yep.
That's all they are. They're PR, they're bullying, they're shaming. And, as long as we stand up for our rights, then we can succeed, and we can develop further our freedoms, and our children deserve that. And that's what this is about for us.
I'm going to that was beautiful. And let me just say one thing before people go, just to give you a little bit of a direction in terms of starting your group. A group starts with 2 or 3 people, and then it grows from there. And if you use these principles that nobody is necessarily in charge or going to tell anyone what to do, and you're going to make your decisions are all going to be unanimous, and you keep the group, I would say no more than 9 people at the most. 8, 6, 7, or 8 is really good. Even 3 or 4 is okay. And I would strive to at least consider trying to have it as much gender balanced as possible. There's something powerful about a balance between feminine and male energy in these groups. That's been my experience. So that majority decision making, and then just go do it. Just start your group, and if you need any help, we'd be happy to help. Kathleen has done a great job in New Mexico in just a few weeks with her groups. And look, it's not easy. By the way, when you decide to have a unanimous decision making, it's going to take longer. It will than if you just have a majority vote. But yes, guess what you'll have? You'll have the buy-in of every single person. Yeah. And that is powerful. That's what we did when I first experienced the power of that, is when we created the Free America Now group to help Richard Mack create the first constitutional sheriff convention in Nevada. And we agreed to do that right before Thanksgiving vacation. And he wanted it done by the late January. And we did it over the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. We put together the whole thing. We got 113 sheriffs there. We had sponsors. We paid for the sheriffs to get there. We raised the money to get them there. We raised the money for their room and board. And it was a phenomenal success. We had phenomenal speakers, Tom Woods and many others. Many of the sheriffs spoke about how they stood down the federales in their counties and kicked them out of their counties who were abusing people in their counties. So the sheriffs have a lot of power, but the main thing is, you know, these groups, that Free America Now group, I mean, it was great. And we used unanimous decision making. We had really a strong group of women in that group, and a good balance, you know, feminine, male energy. Actually, it only takes 2 women to balance out 6 men. That's kind of what I found out from that group. But anyway, it was really very rewarding and very successful. And I know you'll have success because it's the laws of nature, as Jefferson said, are the laws of our being involved here. You put yourself in tune with the laws of our being, which is to develop our full human potential as human beings, our full creativity and mental powers and spiritual powers, then you've got the greatest power on earth working through you as you're putting these things together. And we will not fail. We will not fail as long as we keep that in mind.
Well, thank you very much, Clyde Cleveland. I'm going to put the principles at the bottom of this link,
Okay.
video, and some contact information. So thank you very much again.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.